Hi, welcome to 5 Good Questions. I'm your host, Jake Taylor. Our guest today is Benjamin Bergen. Ben is a professor of cognitive science at UC San Diego, where he teaches and does research on language and the brain. He also earned a PhD in linguistics from UC Berkeley. Today we're going to be discussing his book, What the F? What Swearing Reveals About Our Language, Our Brains, and Ourselves. Fair warning, there is some swearing in this episode, but it's all in the name of science and learning. Let's ask Ben 5 good questions. Welcome back to the show, everybody. My guest today is Benjamin Bergen, author of What the F? I have to admit, I've been looking forward to this interview. The book was a lot of fun to read, not just because of the swearing, but what I enjoyed was that you had some fun with it, as well as making it, I would say, rigorous from an intellectual standpoint.
Yeah, that was kind of the goal. But those three things are hard to do together, but it's what I was trying to do.
Well, I think you accomplished it with aplomb. So let's jump right in. Question number 1. Is there any truth to this myth that swear words come from a different part of your brain than regular language? And also, maybe it'd be good to work in what aphasia is.
Right. Okay, so the way that we know the parts of the brain that are responsible for different functions is first and foremost from brain damage. So when you have compromised functioning of certain neurons, certain cells, you can track down what they do by seeing what behaviors are impaired. And we've known for 150 years that there are certain cells in the brain located in particular places that, when compromised, lead to people having trouble either producing language or understanding language. That's known as aphasia, the language deficit that accompanies brain damage from traumatic brain injury or stroke or a lesion, that sort of thing. And those particular regions specialized for articulating words or associating the sounds of words with their meanings usually inhabit the left hemisphere, people's brains. That's in most people. Some right-handers have it on their left side, and a couple more left-handers have it on the right side, mostly on the left side of the brain, and mostly in the cerebral cortex. That's the evolutionarily new, highly abstract and complex system that humans seem to have in spades, and that differentiates us from lots of other animals in terms of its size. But there's an exception, and that exception appears to be so-called automatic speech. That's the sort of spontaneous, uncontrolled, reflexive production of language that we learned early in life. Oftentimes that's highly emotional. And this includes things like number sequences. So your first couple of numbers, being able to recite 1, 2, 3, 4. It includes nursery rhymes. It includes sort of some interjections like, I don't know. Well, and it strikingly includes the spontaneous production of profanity. And so the consequence is that many people who have damage to those left hemisphere brain centers that are responsible for the bulk of language, and who therefore have either no or very little capacity to intentionally produce words and sentences, nevertheless, they still preserve the capacity to swear. And so you'll see these sort of stereotypical case studies where a person will struggle to put words together, talking about a cat chasing a dog, and they can't get cat out, or they can't get chase out, or they can't get either of them out, and they'll swear. And the swears are easily articulated, fluent. And so we know that there is a different part of the brain that sort of use of profanity is generated by.
So it's almost more the reptilian part of your brain that is responsible for the swearing.
That's right, and we know where it is. Reptilian is right. It appears to be shared with other primates, mammals, and as far as we can tell, vertebrates. It's not the exact same structure, but there are homologs in those other animals of this particular brain structure. It's called the basal ganglia. It's part of the limbic system. And what it does is it selects and suppresses actions on the basis of emotional states. So you're really angry at another animal or another human, and now you've got to decide what to do and specifically what not to do. This is the brain, one of the brain regions that is involved in doing that. And the interesting thing, the reason why it's kind of a myth that there's a completely separate system for profanity is that it's not like all swearing is produced via this other pathway, this basal ganglia limbic system pathway, this evolutionarily old emotion regulation system. It's only the spontaneous production of profanity, the uncontrolled, hot emotional production of profanity. When we're having a conversation like we are now, which is, rational and very deliberate and thoughtful, if we say a swear word, that's not produced by that system. It's produced by the left hemisphere cortical systems that are responsible for the rest of language. So we've got different ways to produce the same words in our singular brains.
Good. So question number 2. It seems like many swear words operate under their own grammar. So like fuck as a swear word almost seems like a Swiss Army knife that can be used in so many different ways. Is that true? I mean, do they function with their own grammar other than regular words?
Right. So we would like it if all of language obeyed certain general principles, right? As scientists, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for grand unifying theories, whether grand unifying theories of physics or grand unifying theories of language. We'd like there to be a maximally general, abstract system of simple rules that could characterize how all of the words go together with all of the other words to make sentences. And there are some very general rules. Sentences, by and large, have subjects. By and large, they have predicates, and those predicates have verbs in them. That's how English works. Problem is that profanity breaks the rules. And so one of the maybe best studied, because it's one of the most common profanities that breaks these rules, is fuck you. So fuck you looks like a weird thing to say because it doesn't actually seem like a sentence. It doesn't have a subject. You might say, well, I know lots of sentences that don't have explicit subjects, like imperatives. So like, go wash your hands. The subject of that sentence is you. You go wash your hands. It's just not explicitly stated, and so you might think that you is the subject of fuck you. But we know that it's not because of this little grammatical trick. So grammarians have all kinds of ways of figuring out what the actual subjects of sentences are, even if the subject is hidden, like in imperative sentences. And one trick is to look at the direct object. So I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds here, but I think I hope you can follow me. So fuck you has a direct object, you, which is explicitly stated. It's the you of fuck you. And we know that fuck you doesn't also have you as a subject because that direct object would have to agree with the subject. That is, it would have to be fuck yourself. And we know that because when you say fuck yourself, that is a regular imperative sentence where you are the subject of the verb fuck, you are the fucker, and you are also the object or patient of the
fucky.
You are the fucky or the fucked, and so you get that self. And we know that fuck you is different. You can't be the subject of fuck you because it's not fuck yourself. Fuck yourself is a different beast. And so for reasons like this, we know that profane expressions, and it's not just fuck you, it's screw you and damn you and so on. They don't appear to have a subject, and that breaks like one of the
core principle. Yeah.
The core. If there's a rule, it's that there are sentences and sentences have subjects, and so this makes us retreat a little bit to think about, well, what are these generalizations about? What are they for? Is it the case that we really have one system? Like, does gravity work the same across space and time in the same way that rules of grammar work the same across the language? Maybe not. Maybe we have special rules for profanity that work differently. Maybe not all sentences have to have subjects, or maybe not all things that we say have to be sentences. It gets complicated because it attacks this core hope that we have that as scientists that we can find general rules. And the new generalization seems to be that there are sub-generalizations for specific ways that we want to use language.
So question number 3, in finance and specifically currencies, money, there's this idea of Gresham's Law, which is basically the worse the currency, it'll drive out other currencies. Like people will hold on to it and they'll spend the junkier currency. There seems to be maybe a Gresham's Law happening with swear words, that once a word takes on a taboo meaning, it starts to crowd out the other non-profane meanings. So I guess this kind of gets at, how do swear words evolve?
Right. So I think that's exactly right as a characterization. Profane words don't usually start profane. There are some that have been invented, and we can see this in recent history. So MILF was invented as a profane word. We all know where it came from. We saw it happen. We saw it spread over time. But that's really the exception. For most of history, both in English and other languages, profane words come from anodyne sources. So you can probably think of many profane words that come from words meaning female dog or mule or a pile of sticks. And the general trend is that words that start with innocuous origins gain new meanings, which themselves get decided upon by a cultural group, by a society, as the words that we don't want to say in public. We decide, well, we have lots of ways of describing sex, for example, or body parts, or whatever. And these particular words, maybe because of how they sound, or maybe because of the way that people around us are using them. Maybe people are using them in order to shock us, or maybe they're using them to cause harm or aggressively. We decide we don't want to hear those words in public, and those changes in our beliefs about the words are what make them profane. So you can see the difference between a word like copulation that you could use with high school kids or your doctor, or you could use with basically anyone. It's a medical term, right, that describes the same thing that fuck does, for the most part.
Yeah.
That even though they're near synonyms, they have very different cultural beliefs about the words. Even though they can't simply be their meaning, it's what we think about them. So as words gain these secondary meanings, fuck didn't always refer to sex. It used to mean something like to hit, strike, or stab. And over the course of its history, it gained this additional meaning. People didn't like how it was being used and how it sounded, and so they decided, okay, this is one that we're not going to allow in public. And that censorship of the word, that decision that, we're going to choose not to use it in particular formal settings or around kids, or we're going to punish children for using it. That is what recreates and magnifies the intensity and the strength of that word as a profane word. So all of this can happen to a word. And what happens then to its original sense? This is to your point. Where did the old sense of fuck go? Where did the old sense of bitch go? Where did the old sense of ass go? And the answer is that they kind of get edged out. What we know from psycholinguistics is that when words have multiple meanings, it's very hard to hear one of those meanings and not unconsciously activate the other meanings. And this is especially true for taboo language. It's just impossible to hear the word pussy, even referring to a cat, and not activate the other senses actually of the word. And as a consequence, right-minded people will decide that those other meanings of the word, those old meanings that are not at all profane, really aren't the type of thing that they want to be using in public. And as a consequence, the use of those words decreases. And we can see this over the course of history. So one of the best examples, I think, is the use of the word dick as a name. So we can actually track, using the Social Security Administration's naming data from actual birth certificate records, track the number of live births that have the name Dick on them as the given name versus the name Rick, for example, or Richard. And what you can see is that there used to be lots of kids, babies, newborns named Dick.
Yeah.
And it peaked in the 40s and 50s, and then it plummeted right around the time of Nixon. But I think not solely because mainly because the word had started to overwhelmingly be used as a term for the penis, and people just didn't want to be calling their babies penis. And so we can see this too in related words like cock. So cock used to just refer to the male chicken, and there wasn't really any other way to refer to male chickens. And then in the 18th century, puritanical Americans decided that they really didn't like the other sense of cock, which had crept up. They didn't like it being around every time they talked about their male chickens. So they replaced the word. They invented a brand new word that hadn't previously existed in the language, and they did so using some machinery that English has for creating new words. They took the word roost, which is the thing that chickens and male chickens included do at night, and they added the suffix "er," and they made rooster. It's a thing that roosts, and they replaced the old use of cock with the new word rooster, and that old sense of cock sort of faded away. And so this type of change is driven exactly by people's taboos about words. The old senses become dispreferred. They may disappear entirely in some cases, as in fuck. We just don't talk about stabbing with the verb fuck anymore.
Yeah.
And in addition, there may be new linguistic innovations, neologisms that come online specifically to fill a new niche that's been created by this avoidance.
Yeah. So, question number 4. One of the most interesting stories in your book is this: the first word of many Samoan children ends up being this really kind of bizarre and also instructive development. What can you explain what that is?
Okay, so we think that we tend to think as parents, and I don't know if you're a parent, but
Yeah.
parents and certainly people around kids tend to ascribe a lot of importance to the first words that a child utters. And we always hope that it's daddy or mommy. And if it's not, we pretend that it is. Or, we come up with some story for why, in my kid's case, his first word was the dog's name. And we like to tell a story about how, well, he heard us talking about her all the time. But I think that we feel like, at least in the U.S., we tend to think that kids are these nascent little communicators, and we're the most important part of their lives. And they're going to produce first words that tell us about their internal mental lives. And we hope that that's telling us that they love us just as much as we love them.
Yeah.
And so that's a belief that we have. And it turns out that that's probably not why they produce mommy or daddy first. And the reason we know that is exactly because of the little Samoan potty mouths. And we know about this from Eleanor Oakes, who's an anthropologist at UCLA. She went to just live with some Samoan villagers. And this was in the 1970s, I think. And what she found was that when she asked around about children's first words, all the mothers reported the exact same word, which is kind of striking because in the U.S., if I ask my undergrads in my, in my freshman class, some of them will say mommy, some of them will say daddy, what was their first word, but, they get a huge spread. In this case, it was all the same word, and it was kai, which in Samoan means shit, and is understood to be part of an expression, aikai, which means eat shit. And so she found this completely baffling, as a white, Western, educated American professor. She'd never seen anything like this or heard of anything, so she dug a little deeper. And here's what she discovered. In Samoan culture, there's a belief that infants are these uncontrollable little animals. They have this animal spirit called amio, which is, we don't really have an exact analog of it, but you can sort of understand why you would believe that children, toddlers, for example, are uncontrollable little animals,
Sure.
This belief is that they are controlled by their passions, that they are intrinsically bad, ill-behaved, and this explains why, they'll throw things in the middle of a church service, or, they'll hit each other, hit their siblings, scream, run around, all the things that toddlers delight us and torture us in doing. And this belief in Samoan culture is much stronger than the belief that they, are these rational little communicators who are going to tell us about their mental lives. As a consequence, when Samoan parents, caregivers, hear Samoan children at about 1 year of age producing sounds, babbling like children do, they run through the same litany of sounds that English-speaking do. They start with tuz and puz and muzz and nuzz and so on, and eventually get to cuz and so on. They hear what their culturally sort of set up to hear.
Yeah, primed to hear.
Exactly. So our expectation is we're going to hear something about us. And so we'll hear mama and think, wow, that's it. That was her first word. Amazing.
It was obvious.
Who would have thought? But I guess she does love me. Whereas a Samoan mother will hear mama and think nothing. Partly because there's no word mama exactly that means mother in Samoan, but also just because that's not an expectation that she has. But as soon as she hears something that sounds a little bit like kai, maybe ka, which you hear a lot from kids, ka, and in fact, we hear. I remember my son saying "ga" a lot. He's just saying "ga, ga, ga."
Yeah,
that's probably close enough, and that Samoan mother is going to know. Well, that's what little kids just say. They just say really rude, offensive things because they're bad. And so, interestingly, the words that we think are our children's first words are really our first words in a way. It's our ears that are determining what our children are interpreted to say first. And I think the really interesting thing about this is that, it's not that they have a cultural belief that we don't have. Of course, we have the exact same belief. It's kind of just the balance. Because there's a little bit more weight to it in Samoan culture, they're more prone to interpret their first words that way.
So they pick their own signal from the noise, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So question number 5. How has the internet changed the way that maybe swear words will start to evolve? On the one hand, it seems like there's a greater chance of homogenization when everybody kind of knows the same swear words. Like, I don't know, like MILF maybe is a good example. But maybe also are we losing some of the local color that previously we had before we had this sort of unifying, mechanism of the internet?
I think with language, as with everything, the internet does both things at the same time. It unifies and it balkanizes. So, your feed will be specific to your friends with, matching beliefs and matching cultural identity and matching everything. So you definitely get differentiation just at the same time as you get homogenization. Well, a couple of ways that you get homogenization, examples of that, include just the increased prevalence of profanity in general in our media lives. Mm-hmm. So if you project back 20 years, when you were still mostly getting media from broadcast television, broadcast radio, movies, all of those are censored.
Right.
And now, I don't know, if you're a 20-year-old, probably you get most of your media from the device in your pocket, and it's mostly coming from other people's thumbs, basically uncensored, or in fact, totally uncensored.
Yeah.
If you look at the internet, whether it's Twitter or Reddit or the comment section under any article, there's a lot of profanity, and it's also true in gaming. So kids play lots of games. They're exposed to lots of video content on YouTube. None of that is censored, and as a consequence, there's just a lot more swearing that they're exposed to. The result of that we can see from survey data is that younger adults, Americans in particular, just don't find swearing that bad anymore.
Yeah.
The offensiveness of of George Carlin's words you can't say on television has plummeted. Fuck is not even in the top 10 words for millennials in terms of offensiveness.
Yeah.
They list a whole bunch of other ones ahead of that. So there's been this sort of progressive change that we seem to see pretty much across the board in younger adults.
I was surprised to see this New York Times actually published with the Trump scandal all of the words. Like, I don't remember them ever doing that before. It seemed like they would always have asterisks and dollar signs and whatever to kind of block it out, but it was fully just written out.
They used fuck once before, I think, or once or twice in describing art pieces that specifically needed to use those words in order to do the work that they did. But yeah, I think this is the first direct quote that I've seen for both of them. So yeah, no, it is that is a type of homogenization. We're starting to agree more on that these words are a little bit more suitable for public consumption, while at the same time other words are not. So I think we're starting to agree more and more that slurs are words that really do offend, and I think this is in part due again to the internet. when I ask my my freshmen about the strongest words in the English language, many of them report that it's some words that you'd be very familiar with, the N word, the C word, but also other words that do similar work. So they find fag quite offensive. They find retard quite offensive. And these are words that, I don't know how old you are, I'm 40, that were run-of-the-mill playground words. Sure. When I was in elementary school, and we didn't really think through the consequences. And young adults appear to now have thought through the consequences. And I think in large part it's because of campaigns that individuals or groups have mounted on the internet to raise awareness. People will report, students in my class will say, well, I know that retard can be hurtful to people because I saw a video of a person who was talking about her brother with Down syndrome. And how it was hurtful to her to hear people use that word, and they don't even use it anymore. They call it the R word. And this again is a change that I think is a unifying change across lots of people. Now, if you don't have that in your feed, then it might not change for you. You might have a reaction to that reaction, sort of like there might be a reactionary turn in which you reject that as kind of a PC move or something like that. And I can certainly imagine that in one feed, people would be really responsive to sensitivity to retard, and in another feed that would be sort of ridiculed. So homogenization maybe within feeds, feed types.
That's interesting. So, bonus question that we always ask every author, and this is for a book recommendation. I'm really curious to see where you go with this one for us.
Well, there are lots of great books that I like to recommend to people. One that I have on my mind right now, because I'm rereading it right now for, I think, the third time, is a book called Stories of Your Life by Ted Chiang. I don't know if you know this book.
No.
It's a set of short stories. It's science fiction. He has a real affinity for stories about language. And so there are stories about first contact with aliens who use language in a totally different way and see time in a totally different way, kind of like Slaughterhouse-Five sort of seeming. He's got stories about Babel. He's got one about the Tower of Babel and sort of reimagines it and how it would have worked. And I just find them really, really satisfying, really joyful explorations of language and all of its manifestations through science fiction ideas. And there's a new movie actually coming out based on one of the stories from that book. I can't remember what its title is. Maybe it's something about first contact. I can't remember what it is. But the book is fantastic, and I definitely recommend it. Stories of Your Life.
Wow, that sounds great. Yeah, they're definitely off the beaten path too.
Yeah,
which is good. I always like that.
Uh-huh.
Well, Ben, it's been great having you, and you wrote a really interesting book, and appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thanks so much. It was a real pleasure, and I love your questions.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you'd like to support this author and purchase their book, click here. If you'd like to become a subscriber to 5GQ, click here. And I included a couple other interviews that you might appreciate right here. Thanks. Happy reading.